Serious people who walked out of a job interview. Why did you do it? Sat down with the owner and the first thing he said was, "I don't hire people with beards." I said okay, got up and walked out. I remember hearing a story about an engineer who went to a headhunter for help in finding a job. He was told first thing that he needed to shave off his beard. The headhunter lands him a group interview with an engineering firm. He walks into the room having noticeable tan lines on his face because he'd just shaved his beard. And each one of the male engineers who were interviewing him had a beard. First rule of using a headhunter is, don't listen to the headhunter. They are twice as stupid as you think they are. Ducking headhunters. I had one edit my resume and put me in an interview for it. The interviewer and I both realized what had happened. So I called the headhunter and had him admit it to me. He didn't know he was on speaker, and I was still in the room with the interviewer. I believe it cost him some revenue. Pyramid scheme advertised as sales and marketing. It was a group interview. They served wine for duck's sake. They had obvious stooges initiating conversation about how great this opportunity was. I got very drunk and stopped being polite about it. For anyone in the comments, if you have nerves of steel and are as stubborn as a horse, you can go to these kind of things all the time and get a ton of free food and drink on the regular. Just make sure not to ever sign anything. It's not like they aren't scamming people anyways. Besides, they're giving it out for free. How might one find one of these? I could always go for free drinks and a good story. I once went to a job interview for a large welding shop in the middle of a rainstorm. After talking to the interviewer for 30 or so minutes, he walked me out to the shop floor to take a welding test. The machine we went to was in decent condition, but was literally sitting in a puddle of water. The welding table's legs were rusty and not grounded well, and also in said puddle, over half the shop was flooded. I turned around and said no thank you, then proceeded to walk out the door. My life is worth more than 20 an hour. Haha. I actually ended up getting a job under similar circumstances as a plant engineer. Saturday interview. Show up to an empty office, the boss in the yard, elbow deep in a genset. Spent 20 minutes standing in the yard talking about the vehicle I showed up in weird JDM import 4x4. A conversation piece XD. It starts pissing down with rain and he just goes, "Give me a hand finishing this off will you?" and starts handing me tools. Got soaked to the skin in my no PPE smart interview clothes. After 40 minutes of random chit chat, him showing me the way around the genset he was working on in the rain. He asks when I could start. Was there almost 3 years when the business sadly went under. Great guys to work for. Later transpired that I was one of the first people he interviewed, junior partner in the team of 3 directors. He had no plans for it whatsoever. Does he know what he's talking about? Yes. 20-minute convo about a vehicle he worked on. Is he a prima donna? No. He was willing to work in his decent clothes. Can he work as part of a team? Yes. He helped me finish off the job I was working on. In my opinion, there are much worse interviewing techniques than this. Definitely better than, if you could be any kitchen appliance, what would you be and why? Applied for a software developer position for an online retailer. First round of interviews was a traditional technical skills and whiteboard coding session. Second round was a cultural fit interview with our. I assumed it would be an one-on-one interview with our. It was a room with 20 something people applying for anything from legal to finance. They asked us to stand up, then crawl into a ball and pretend we were flowers opening. At this point I honestly thought it was some kind of prank. Then I saw everybody around me doing it. I just said thanks for the opportunity and left. Sounds like you stumbled into one of those candid camera prank shows. Or maybe some bizarre psychological experiment to see if you would go along with it. Man, if someone made me dress up and take time off work just to make me the butt of the joke, I would lose my shit. Happened fairly recently. Made it to the 3rd interview for a large company. The first 2 they told me what my role would be. Base pay commission. Told me they were so excited to have me on board because of my experience. So I sit down for the 3rd interview. They again go over my role, my pay, etc. They say they are prepared to offer me that job right now and had the paperwork ready since this morning. But then they say, but we already hired someone for that. So instead what we'd like you to do is and proceeded to tell me the pay was less than half what they were already offering me prior for a lot more work. Basically, I went from being offered a management job to just being asked to train all the new employees they just hired, then step down to cashier for $10 per hour and no guaranteed hours. I stood up and told them I was worried I was wasting their time prior to this interview because I wasn't entirely sold on the job yet. But after today, it's become pretty apparent you guys were the ones wasting my time instead. No thank you. And I left. About an hour later I got a phone call asking for a fourth interview. They called almost every day for 2 weeks asking me to come back and talk to the owner. I hate these rug pull things. I went through an interview process for a specific position, but was told that it would be less senior and for less money because of my experience. I ended up taking a much better offer elsewhere, which is where I'm currently at. They didn't advertise the salary. I don't normally apply to those postings, but this one looked decent and I liked the company. One of their first questions was my salary expectations. Turns out I was expecting double what they wanted to offer. It was amicable enough for a walkout, but we shook hands and agreed there was no point in continuing. Lesson learned on applying for jobs that don't post compensation. I stayed there out of morbid curiosity to see how low they would go, but I had made the decision I wasn't gonna work there early in the process. I'm glad I stayed. The last thing that happened in the interview was the CEO personally asking us all to promise that if we ever make a mistake, the company will calculate how much that mistake cost us, and we will voluntarily pay the company that amount. So by that logic, if you do something extra, does the company promise to pay you the benefits from it? It was a virtual interview and I ended it. The interviewer was a complete jerk, had an ego, and would make condescending remarks. Just told him that it sounds like he's not interested in working together, so in the interest of both our time, we should just end the call. I had a phone interview one time and we had scheduled it for noon. He called me at 7 AM. I was still asleep, so when I answered the phone it took me a moment to figure out what the heck was going on. He said that in a line of work we should be ready for anything, lol. It was a 4-month position with Fish and Game doing carcass surveys looking for dead salmon. He kept asking a lot of hypothetical questions like, if you're walking a stream and a guy jumps out of the bushes and points a gun at you, what do you do? Apparently the correct answer is call the cops and then get back to work. The questions got nuttier, but they always involved a guy pointing a gun at me, and I said, look, if people are going to be pointing guns at me, I don't want the job, and I hung up. Owner of a bar told me in the first interview to never approach him with a problem because I wouldn't like how he fixed it. That tells me he either doesn't know how to fix things or he uses illegal methods to fix things. I'm a vet tech. Interviewed at a primary care single doctor practice. The manager was over 25 minutes late to my interview. While I waited for her, the front desk staff ignored me while they talked crap about the techs, manager, and clients. The manager said they did not believe in referring to any specialists because Dr. A is a specialist in everything from grizzly bears to canaries. He was not. He hadn't even done a rotating internship and definitely had not done any type of residency program. I had already worked in a toxic clinic, but at least the doctors were competent. When she asked if I had any questions, I just asked if I could have my resume back, so I didn't waste the paper. Power move for asking for your resume back. Slightly different, I actually interviewed and was hiring by a call center that focused on getting donations for a variety of non-profit organizations. I was desperate. It was on a Thursday, and I was told to show up the following Monday. When I showed up Monday morning, the entire business unit was completely empty, like stripped to the floor, wires hanging from the roof empty. When I was there the week before, I saw around 20-25 cubicles of people all working diligently, a manager's desk at the far back, and waiting area chairs with a table, all in one large room. To this day I have no idea what happened. I just know they got out of there quick in 3 days time. Wow, you just reminded me of one of the first jobs I had. It was a call center as well, but we were trying to sell people timeshares. It was in some dingy strip mall in a weird part of town. I show up for my shift. Coincidentally, this was also when they were going to give out our paychecks and the whole place was completely deserted, wires hanging and no cubicles. Everything gone. It was the weirdest place to work too. The manager was extremely shifty and most of the staff were kids like me or people who looked like they had just gotten out of jail. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone at first. Then I just figured they left so they didn't have to pay us. I don't think I made even one successful sale there. It probably was people just out of prison. I briefly worked at one of these places and the draw was they would hire literally anyone. No questions asked. Paid weekly. We called people in Canada from US. Said it was illegal to do in US. So we called Canada. And just tried to get money for different non-profits each day with little spiel cards. Got some points to get credit cards over checks. We did get paid each week. I don't know if they were real non-profits who paid this organization to call for money or a scam. Didn't last long. It was a pretty miserable job. I was approached at work bagger for a major grocery store chain when I was 16 by a guy who asked me if I would be interested in making $1,100 a week. He told me to meet him at one of the empty businesses in the same plaza after work. He went on this long spiel about the melaleuca tree from Australia and how his company made soaps and shampoo out of it. Then he told me for $500 he would train me how to sell the products. I just turned and walked out the door with him yelling behind me that I would never amount to anything with my attitude. It was a commission-based sales job selling kitchen knives. The interviewer pulled out a knife and it fell apart in his hands. I'm also not a salesperson. Showed up and realized it was a pyramid scheme that involved door-to-door sales. Edit. Thank you to everyone sharing your own experiences with these and the replies. I actually really appreciate reading your stories. I applied for a register position at Pizza Hut. I specifically told them during my 2 interviews that I cannot be a delivery driver due to my car being unreliable. They even acknowledged that and told me okay. Got the job. Came in for training on the first day. The very first thing they do is sit me down in a chair and started up a training video on delivery driving. I asked them if I could skip it since I'm only working the register in the kitchen. And the manager tells me that every position is a delivery driver. Walked out right then and there and got paid for 1 hour of training. I once showed up for a job interview in a suit and tie after answering a newspaper ad for a warehouse worker. Instead of a job interview at the warehouse, they had me get into some truck with one of the employees who drove me a few hours away, pulled over in some random neighborhood, and explained to me that the job was going door to door trying to sell cuts of meat to people. Unsolicited. I told him this was not the warehouse worker job that they had advertised, and if he didn't bring me back home immediately, I was going to call the police and report a kidnapping. I was brought back to my car, but I was not paid for the several hours of my wasted time. Duck you. Pacific Prime of Cromwell, Connecticut. Anytime a job wants you to go in their vehicle to a remote location, it's a scam. Never go to a second location with a hippie. Third and final interview all same day at a tech company. First 2 went well, and I was told this last one just was a formality. They wanted me to join. Interview with the head of the office guy seemed to start well. We walked to the cafeteria, grabbed a couple coffees, and with some small talk we learned we knew some of the same people. We get back to his office and sit down. He looks at my file. It says here you're looking for certain salary. I said yes, and explained it's really close to market for someone with my skills and experience. He looks at me and says, I don't think you're worth it. I said excuse me. He repeated it. I laughed, grabbed my bag, stood up, thanked him for his time and walked out. The company went out of business like a year later, so I feel I dodged a bullet there. Told the hiring manager I would like to give more than just 2 weeks at my current job as a courtesy. He raised his voice and said everyone is replaceable and they'll find that out. Yeah, that seems like a good mentality for your boss to have later. Tata. Showed up and the manager practically bragged about how the job offered no breaks for an 8-10 hour shift. And if there was a food break it would be 5 minutes maximum at a hip height table with no chairs. She said that you'd be fired if you sat down even for 30 seconds. I'm more than capable of doing that. I did that every day at my last job. But when you brag about how your employees are so overworked that they don't get breaks or an option to rest their legs, it tells me all I need to know about how little you value your employees. I should also note that this job wasn't paying exceptionally well, above minimum wage, but not at a level that was even enough to live on. Not quite an interview, but when I finished university I didn't have a sensible job to go to immediately. I went to a job agency and said I was looking for a temporary job for experience working in my chosen field. I didn't mind exactly what it was, or really how much it paid. We talked about my existing qualifications and experience. At the end of the interview they said they had the perfect job for me. Someone will pick me up the following morning. I said that I could drive, but no, they would pick me up. Fine. As I said, didn't really care where it was or exactly what I was doing as long as it met my admittedly vague requests, and they assured me that it was. The following day a minibus came to get me. So where did they take me to work? A salad packing factory. To spend the day literally packing salad. I was getting paid. So what did it matter for one day? The worst was finding out over lunch was that if I had literally just turned up at the factory they would have probably given me work. That is what happened for most of the staff there, who were largely seasonal workers from Eastern Europe. And those folk were also paid more than me, not because I was new, but anybody who just turned up would likely get work and get paid more than I was. Obviously they took us there by minibus, so we wouldn't just leave once we'd been tricked into going. So I did exactly that. Finished my lunch and then walked home. A jumped up security guard made me walk away before I even got in the building for an interview. I followed the instructions I was sent by the hiring manager, which was to park in the designated guest spaces. Security guard came charging out of the building yelling at me when I was barely out of the car about how I couldn't park there. Then when I raised my voice just to try and get him to listen, he started yelling at me for yelling at him. Eventually when I got to tell him that I was told to park there, he called the hiring manager and started yelling at them about how I'd been yelling at him. Partway through that phone call I thought, no a-hole here, duck this. Got back in the car and drove off. The hiring manager called me to apologize and asked if I'd come back. I politely declined, saying I wanted nothing to do with that security guard again. It was for a management position, running a mailroom. Something I'd done twice before. All the standard questions were asked. I felt like it was going well. Then he suddenly says to me, "I'm hearing a lot of I from you. I'm concerned. Because we are about the team and not the individual. Here, the heck. It's a job interview and you're concerned that I'm answering questions you have asked specifically about me with answers that address your questions about me. That's utterly nonsensical." I don't even remember how I responded, but I knew I didn't want to deal with his stupid semantic word and mind games, which I was sure I'd only seen the surface of. So I steered us right into concluding the interview, and I left. I also made a subtle show of taking back the copies of my resume that I'd brought with me. They spelled my name wrong on their internal documents, all the while emphasizing how important attention to detail was. On top of that, they kept asking the same exact question about 12 different ways, which the answer to it was clearly listed in my work experience on my resume. This was for a thermal engineering position. They offered a tour of the facility while the person I was to work under finished up a meeting. I declined and left.